We are now recording. Yeah.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, now we're good to go.
All right. Okay. So let me get my screen share up. Screen share. We'll do the screen. Did that screen share just work?
Yes.
Yes. Cool. All right. Okay. So. All right, so hello everybody. Welcome to this talk about Fedimint, and specifically going through the fedimint.org docs site. So as a bit of background, my name is Winn. I bloody love Bitcoin. I've also been quite interested in eCash as a scaling solution for Lightning for a few years now. So I got quite interested in this after reading the script white paper by Frank Brown and Smuggler a couple of years ago, which tweaked my curiosity, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Recently, I decided that it was morally I had to quit my previous career and just go and work on Bitcoin full time. I didn't know how to do that, so I started looking around for places to do some open source contributions. This led me towards Fedimint when I saw what Eric was building. That led to me doing a new set of documentation to kind of explain some of the concepts that were different in Fedimint and how they relate to Bitcoin and so on. And then after that, I got a role as a product lead over at Fedi. So that's who I am. In terms of the documentation, what you can see on the screen is this site over here. There's like a whole little primer section on this, which is sort of the areas that we're going to go through today. So like, why would you use a Fedimint? Who are they for? What is it? What are the core technology components? Now, a lot of this came together as part of a talk that I did on Fedimint at the Yeppoon Aussie Bush Bash. So I don't, you might have seen this event over on Twitter. So shout out to the Wizard of Oz and Bill Huddle on Comrades for organising a great event. And then the sort of artifacts and imagery from that presentation is what became the sort of skeleton for this documentation site. Yeah, and so this is going to be a light version of that talk. So that talk itself ran for, I think, just over 2 hours, maybe 2.5. So in order to keep things flowing today, I've rehearsed a little bit more. And I'll probably just breeze through all of the components of the talk. And so if anyone's got any questions, just drop them in the chat. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll just come back to those and have a look and go through the Q&A. Okay, so the talk is on Fedimint. What's a Fedimint? At a very technical level, it's an open source protocol to custody and transact Bitcoin in a community context built on a strong foundation of privacy. Or, as I like to say, it's be your mum's bank, or be your friend's bank, or be your mate's bank, or be your community's bank. It's all about being somebody else's bank, although I get that we don't really like the word bank over here. At a high level concept, what we could talk about here is that it's a community custody platform. All right, it takes in a whole community of people, but only a few of those people actually have to run the platform. So it's run by this trusted set of community members. What it provides to that community is private Lightning payments. So you get a very simple wallet concept with very good privacy that's quite easy for everybody else in the community to run. So it's for the benefit of the community, who then put their funds in the custody and run by the trusted community members. So this is how a Fedimint works at a high level. So what we're going to see today, if I just zoom out a sec, give you a look at the presentation. We're going to go through the why, the who, the what, the how the transactions work. We'll get into a little bit of the trade-offs, and then we'll point to where you can learn more and get into questions. All right. So, why Fedimint? So, when I gave this talk previously, the first question out to the audience was, what's the significance of the number 640 million? Given I'm kind of just broadcasting today, I'll just say the idea here is That's the total number of UTXOs that you could transact in a Bitcoin blockchain over the course of a year. And so that's our sort of theoretical maximum as well. This doesn't include anybody opening Lightning channels or doing fancy scripts. So what that kind of implies is that there's some sort of limit to the amount of people that might be able to utilize a UTXO on chain over the course of a year. And if we think about Lightning and we say, okay, well, how might we use Lightning across billions of users? We quickly get to the point where we think, okay, well, maybe we need different ways of solving this and sharing those UTXOs out amongst more people. So one of the things I like about Fedimint is it gives you a way to do that now. So how can we right now start to share UTXOs across multiple different people and start to build a solution that could work for billions and billions of people? All right. And there's obviously other solutions to that problem as well. So we have, coin pools, channel factories, more custodians, various different ways of doing it. But Fedimint is one of those. So the three benefits that we like to highlight of Fedimint: the community custody, the financial privacy, and the scaling aspects. So if we drill into each of these, inside the community custody, what we're talking about here is a different approach to the problem of custody, specifically targeting how we do third-party custody and can we bring some of those people into a more self-custodial manner. So on the one end of this spectrum, we've got self-custody, which is all about I look after everything to do with my own Bitcoin. I run my own node, I run my own Lightning nodes, I hold all my own keys, I take on all of that responsibility. And what I get for that that's really good is I do get pretty good privacy, and I get very high levels of control over my own Bitcoin and my own funds and what I can do with that. But the trade-off that I make is the convenience. It takes time, it takes knowledge. There's a lot of work that goes into creating that system and maintaining that system over time. And now for a lot of people, it's worth that trade-off. And we strongly encourage people to go down that route of self-custody, particularly where there's significant funds at play. Now, on the other end of this scale, we've got the third party. So this is your online exchanges, your trusted third-party custodians. And the trade-off that you're making there is that you get really low privacy. They can see everything that you're doing. You get low aspects of control because they can tell you when you can or can't spend your UTXOs, your Bitcoin, your money. So this is money that can be turned off when you're over here. It's money that you have to ask for permission to spend. And really the point of Fedimint and community custody as a model is to bring more of the people out of that third-party custody space and further towards self-custody, whilst recognizing that not everybody's willing to make that convenience trade-off. So what we're talking about in the middle there is how can we provide a highly convenient model for custody with really good, excellent privacy aspects, and maybe sacrificing some of the control from the self-custody, but providing better control than you would get in a third-party environment. So that's what we're after. We often refer to this as our second-party trust, which we'll come on to in a moment. All right. So the next benefit we had was all about financial privacy. So if we drill into financial privacy, there's a bunch of technical discussion, which I'll save for a moment when we get to it. But effectively what we do by adopting eCash as our model and blind signing as a way of interacting with this federation, this Fedimint, is that we create a little knowledge firewall that sits between the guardians, the people that run the federation on behalf of the community, and then the users of the community. And what the guardians tend to see are these little blinded packages where there's some information that they can sign, they can process, but they really can't see anything that's going on below this knowledge firewall. And the particular things that they're not aware of are sort of who any particular user is in a transaction. The next one might be they don't actually really know the full amount of users that they might have that are being serviced by that federation. And they also don't know who any particular Bitcoin belongs to or the total balance of Bitcoin for any particular user inside that federation. So you get these really nice like separation and privacy aspects of going into a Fedimint, and we'll talk a little bit later about how those come about when we go through the technical aspects. And then the final benefit that we talk about is the scaling aspects of this. And to describe this, I like to imagine a roadmap. And so this is an analogy I was putting to work a lot in Riga recently, talking to people late at night. But one way I think we often think about Bitcoin is almost like we're playing the first person shooter Doom or Duke Nukem from back in the day. And we're there, we're running around, we're seeing everything else of the world out there. And it's all about, my node, my Lightning node, I've got this stack, and then everything else is sort of over there away from me. And I think there's maybe like another perspective you could look at the Bitcoin network from as being more like a roadmap. And I think if we look at it like a roadmap, what you start to see is that Bitcoin is all of these different places on this roadmap. So here's a handy little roadmap for us. There's lots of different places on here, and they're all interconnected by roads. And you start to see that, maybe we've got a little country manor over here with a private road leading into a town. And your country manor, that can be a bit like your cold storage. It's the place that you own, and nobody can tell you what to do in your own country manor, and you've got the full control of everything that goes on in there. But sometimes you like to go into town because you've got transactions that you need to make, and you want to do some business. Maybe you want to be a little bit more anonymous about what's going on, so you don't want it to be done at home, so you go into town. And that could be like you take a road, which is like your Lightning network, over to a different place where you start to do some business. And then sometimes you might want to go to a place that's really anonymous. Sometimes you just want to go to Vegas. And when you go to Vegas, what happens in Vegas is supposed to stay in Vegas. So you want a really high anonymity set. So it's like flying all the way over to this village where there's a lot of stuff going on, and you can be completely anonymous, and that's just a place you've gone to for a while. And then sometimes maybe you come back afterwards to your country manor and you sit back in your cold storage. And I think if you can think of like Bitcoin as this network of all these different places connected by all these different roads and aeroplanes, which are a bit like your Lightning network, and your Bitcoin can be in any of these different places as you see fit. Now, the scaling aspect of Fedimint is when we look at that roadmap is to say there might just be a single dot on this map, and maybe it's only got a couple of Lightning channel roads coming out of that dot. But inside that dot, what we have is all the economic density of that town, of that village, that's all being supplied by a couple of lightning channels. So what we get is a very natural way of scaling the Lightning network for Bitcoin by taking a lot of the economic density, putting it inside this one mint structure, and then connecting those mints by the Lightning network. So we can move to these different towns, villages, different places that we might want to exist, or back to our cold storage. But when we're inside that place, all of the different transactions that go on are all done off chain. So if you think about it like zooming in on the map, what you see is there's a lot more roads, a lot more granularity, and a lot more stuff going on. And so that's the sort of scaling aspect that we think about with Fedimint. So let me just zoom back out. All right. So next is the who. So the who component of this is often you hear people talk about Fedimints, and you kind of wonder if the expectation is that there's going to be one Fedimint, many Fedimints, two or three Fedimints, and this is really to paint the picture of the idea is that there's going to be hundreds of thousands to millions of these potential Fedimints, each clustering together communities of people to then share those resources and scale out that network. And some of the different ways that we think that might exist is on a similar sort of spectrum to before. So on one end, what we might have is really high second party trust relationships. So this can be like a small family or a really close friend group where you really trust each other, but there's not that many people that would be in that group. So it's got a slightly lower anonymity set. So you might have a federation like that, where you're maybe more storing coins as opposed to spending them. And then over on the other side of this, you might have the community, which this could be hundreds to thousands of people to maybe like a 10,000 people community, where yes, there's some trust relationships that are probably built into other organizational structures inside that community, but it's a slightly lower second party trust, but it's a much higher anonymity set. So maybe this is more like your daily transaction Fedimint. So you might move from your family Fedimint to your community Fedimint to do more of your daily spending because it gives you better privacy guarantees. And then in between, you'll have different layers of like Fedimints with friends or other people that you might want to take advantage of. And it really is that spectrum of trade-offs that go from low anonymity, high trust to lower second party trust and higher anonymity. And then the bit over to the side here, which I think is worth talking about, but is not it's not necessarily the focus. So a lot of the Fedimint focus assumes this second party trust relationship, but it's an open source project, it's a modular project, and the federation component that it uses allows you to build other federated services. So I think what we sort of expect is probably going to happen is that there'll probably be even larger, more anonymous federations that crop up that don't have that close second party trust relationship, but do provide a very, very high anonymity set. That's a really flexible design space. There's lots of interesting things that could be done in that space. It's probably a little bit more problematic potentially from a regulatory point of view, and potentially from a trust space as well. So again, you don't have those close second party trust relationships, which is why we don't necessarily talk about it a lot inside the website, but it's likely that there'll be a set of services built out around that as well. Okay, so moving on the what. So this is a diagram that may look vaguely familiar from a few different places. I'm just going to pop out of view mode so I can grab this pointer so we can point things out. So the purpose of this diagram was to kind of try and show all the logical components of a Fedimint in one place, so we can talk it through and just give people an idea of like what's involved and how it interacts, and then just layer conversation on top of that. So if we go from like a user perspective, what we'd say is there's two main user types, which are the guardians over here and the user over here. The guardian's job is all about maintaining and looking after that federation. So similar to something like the Liquid sidechain, which has its I can't remember the name they call them now, but it's got its signers and its various people that are part of the maintaining the federation, signing for the transactions. You have a similar role here with the guardians. And these guardians do a couple of different things. The first bit that they do is they're responsible for custody of Bitcoin. So the way the mint works is that you deposit Bitcoin into the mint, and then that Bitcoin all goes into a multi-sig contract, and the keys to that multi-sig are owned by these guardians. All right. So one of the key things that they do is they hold the keys for the multi-sig custody. Now, when you've deposited that Bitcoin into there, what you get issued is effectively a Fedimint Bitcoin. I've picked up a line. There we go. So you get issued this Fedimint Bitcoin, and we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about what that is. And so the other job of the guardians is to issue and redeem and check the Fedimint Bitcoin. So they will issue Fedimint Bitcoin when you deposit Bitcoin. If you give them a Fedimint Bitcoin, they'll either give you your Bitcoin back, or they will swap it for another Fedimint Bitcoin if that's what you would like to do. And that's part of the transaction process that we'll come on to. They also provide some other services, so you can do social recovery and backups. So for instance, if I'm the user over here and this is my Fedimint wallet, I can back up my wallet to the federation because I'm already implicitly trusting this federation of these guardians with all of my Bitcoin anyway. So I believe them to be somewhat honest. So why not take advantage of that as part of my backup process? So that's an area that's being explored currently as well. So the different ways you could design that. The other thing that can be done is there's this consensus and execution engine which just is really like a modular structure that allows you to build different applications inside the Fedimint to do different things. So the eCash is a particular module. The Bitcoin multisig is implemented as a module. If you wanted to add, I don't know, state chain support or I don't know, liquid multisig support, they would be new modules inside the federation, and they would run inside this consensus and execution engine. Another area that we'll talk about a little bit is there's the ability to do HTLCs or hash time lock contracts inside the Fedimint, which allows you to interact with the Lightning Network in a very similar way. So this is the roles of the Guardian. The user, quite simply, they would come in, load the wallet, scan a QR code in order to join a federation. They can deposit Bitcoin. Once they do, they get their Fedimint Bitcoin, and they can send and receive and trade or pay Lightning invoices from that wallet. Now, one third role that we didn't discuss was this Lightning Gateway Provider. Now, the Lightning Gateway Provider is effectively a special version of the user role. It's a way to think about this is it's just another user that happens to have a Lightning node. And because that user has a Lightning node, and as a user, they're happy to accept the Fedimint Bitcoins, and they have that trust relationship with the mint, they're happy to effectively bridge the Fedimint system to the Lightning Network, which allows this Fedimint app over here to pay any Lightning invoice or another Fedimint via the Lightning Network. And we'll see the mechanics of that in a moment. So let's go back to view mode. So first though, it's three sort of core technical pieces that make this work and allow us to do them. So I'll go into each of those quite quickly. So the first is the eCash and the blind signatures. So this is our FMBTC, a Fedimint Bitcoin. So what is a Fedimint Bitcoin, and why aren't we just calling it a Bitcoin? Well, we just want to differentiate between the eCash notes and the actual Bitcoin that's held in the multisig. So this Fedimint Bitcoin is effectively an IOU that's redeemable for the Bitcoin that's in the multisig. The real Bitcoin is the Bitcoin in the multisig. The stuff that you're holding is effectively an accounting system, which is your claim on the Bitcoin that's inside the multisig. Now, this IOU is all verified using various blind signature algorithms. So we'll come on to what the blind signature is in a sec. But take the first bit of the IOU, like what is this eCash note? So what we see is the eCash note is effectively, well, simply, it's kind of like 2 bits. You've got a very large random number, which we use as a reference. So this is just a unique reference that's generated by the user that owns the note. And then we have a federation signature. So this is a signature which is arrived at by the Guardians doing a federated signature scheme. I don't want to go into too much technical detail. There's some great white paper Wednesdays that Cody Lowe runs that really go into this if you want to know more. But what it does is effectively all the Guardians come together and they sign that note with a particular key, and these keys are rated at different amounts of money. So for instance, here we see that there's a reference number signed with a 10,000 sats key. And so what happens is when I take that back to the mint and I say, I'd like my 10,000 sats, they look at this and they ask 2 questions. The first question is that a valid key? And they can check that between the Guardians, and they say, if no, it's rejected. If it's a yes, it's a valid signature, yes, okay, we'll do the second check, which is they take this large reference number that was the other part of the note, and they say, okay, have we seen this before? And what they're doing here is they're kind of controlling for double spend. There you go. So Cody's just posted a chat message about White Paper Wednesday, so I encourage you to attend. So this is controlling your double spends, and it's saying, okay, well, if this every time an eCash note is given in, what we're going to do is we're going to burn that reference number because we're issuing something else out, either the Bitcoin or another eCash token. So if I've seen it before, it's already burnt, somebody's trying to double spend, and we just reject that payment. All right. So then the privacy part of this is all about how you get that signature on that note. So obviously if I give you a note with a reference number on and you sign it, you can see the reference number and you've signed it. So you understand what the reference numbers are ahead of time. So the innovation that came with eCash, which was to use a blind signature algorithm to then add a signature to the note without looking at that reference number ahead of time. And what that means is that the mint effectively doesn't know the different reference numbers that it's signed until the redemption is made. So it's only at the point of redemption that that particular reference number is revealed, and that's how we get a lot of the privacy guarantees. So the way to think about the blind signing algorithm is the canonical example that was given by sort of David Chow back when he invented eCash. I think it was in the 80s, but I could be off there. Was effectively think about it like a note in a sealed envelope with carbon paper inside. So carbon paper being the paper that you can use to copy your signature across multiple pages. So you put the note in, you seal the envelope. Instead of just giving the note to the mint, effectively like a cashier, you give them the sealed envelope. They sign the sealed envelope, and then because they sign the outside of the envelope, it presses into the carbon paper, and then inside you get the contract, which is your reference number signed with that signature, that can then be validated back by the bank at a later time to prove that the note was real. So that's kind of the process that we go through. And again, I'll leave the more technical details to White Paper Wednesdays. Now, the second technical component that we need to think about is the federation. So DigiCash, which was David Chow's business back in the 90s, was a complete eCash solution on the internet. It ended up getting shut down and running out of money. I'm never entirely sure whether it was shut down or run out of money, but it seemed to suffer from being a single issuing bank entity after the introduction of various bank secrecy laws. Didn't seem to help. So what's been done in Fedimint, and the reason for the name Fedimint is Federated Chalmian Mint, so the portmanteau of the words there, is that it's created, instead of having a single issuer of the note, you have now a federation that issues the notes and redeems the notes. Now what that gives you is three different things really. First of all, it means that it's multiple parties that hold the underlying collateral. So instead of entrusting all of your precious Bitcoin to a single person and hoping they don't steal, you can now entrust it to multiple people, and you have this sort of guardian standoff amongst all these people where they kind of keep each other honest, because a majority of the guardians now have to collude to steal that money. So that's one of the things. The next thing it gives you is a little bit more redundancy in the payment infrastructure. So again, if this is deployed on, let's say lower spec infrastructure in various places around the world, you might want more redundancy around coming to consensus around these spends. So it means that one of these, say it's a free guardian system here, one of them could be down. If there's 15 guardians, maybe a few can be down at any one time, and you can still operate. And then the third thing that it gives you is better regulatory positioning. So again, often regulations are written based on the notion of custodial ownership of the coins that are effective there. So if you're one of many guardians, or one of many in a multi-sig, you're generally not considered to be the owner of those coins or the controller of those coins in any particular instance. So again, it gives better regulatory view there of like what you're allowed to do and how. And then the third sort of technical innovation inside here that we'll talk about is probably the lightning swaps. And so I would tend to refer to it as a swap, because I think that's the easiest way of trying to think this through. And I'll go through a more piece by piece transaction in a minute so we can see how the money flows. But the way I like to think about this is we have this little guy. I'm going to call him Dave for the sake of argument today. Dave is a user of our Fedimint, but he also runs a Lightning node. And so what Dave has decided is that I'm willing to hold Fedimint Bitcoin, but I'm also willing to hold normal Bitcoin and Lightning. But I'll swap one for the other as long as there's some profit in me. I don't mind. I don't mind which one it is that I hold. And so effectively, Dave's a guy with two balance sheets. he's got a bag of eCash and his bag of Lightning. And he says, as long as I've got more at the end of the day, I'll swap some of this for some of this and some of this for some of this. And then that allows him to create and to receive and pay Lightning on your behalf and settle into eCash on the other side of the trade. We'll, again, get into that in a sec. Okay. So that's the components of the Fedimint. So I'll just pause for a sec on this picture, and then if anyone has any questions, as I say, drop them in the chat and we can come back to all of this at the end. All right. Okay, so the next bit that we'll pop into is around how do we actually execute transactions. So first of all, we'll do an intramint transaction. So how would an eCash transaction settle inside a Fedimint? Oh, got a lot of talking today. All right, let's get out of view mode. Okay, so today we've got Alice and Bob. Alice and Bob happen to be inside the same Fedimint, and Alice is going to pay Bob because that's all she does all day inside Bitcoin circles. So Bob has grabbed this little QR code and he's shown that to Alice so she knows who is requesting the money and how much. And it happens to be a 15,000 sat payment. And so the first thing that happens over here is Alice goes, okay, well, 15,000 sats, I've got this 10,000 sat eCash token, I've got a 5,000 sat eCash token, I'm just going to send those to Bob. And that's quite different to what we might expect in a Bitcoin context, where usually Alice would go and talk to this magic blockchain over here and she'd broadcast transactions, the time would pass and eventually it would all settle. It's a little bit different in the eCash world. It's effectively, she just goes, bang, here you go, here's the tokens, I'll just give them to you, they're worth this much money. And Bob's got a little bit of computer knowledge about him, and he says, that's all right that you've given me those tokens, but I happen to know that a move is just like a copy in the computer world, so how do I know that you don't still have those tokens? So I'm glad that I've got them, but I'm not going to accept them as complete yet. So instead, take step 2. He sends those tokens back to the mint and he says, hey mint, here's 15,000 Fedimint sats. Can I get a 15,000 sat voucher instead? And the mint just says, yep, no problem, Bob, here you go. Gives that back to Bob, and that settles the transaction at that point. So whilst the initial transaction was made, that the bearer certificates, because these actually are the money, it's just small packets of data that you could hand over, even though they go to Bob, that's not a settled transaction until Bob's checked with the mint and got some new ones, that only he now knows the secret number that allows them to be redeemed. So that's an intra-mint transaction. That's effectively how they look. Now if we come down, it's a little bit more complex if we look at the whole Lightning network or intramint. So the way the Lightning integration works and the inter-Fedimint integration works is actually quite similar. So what we'll do is we'll start off with the Lightning version, and then we'll just talk about how it changes when we introduce a second Fedimint. So we've got 5 steps effectively that we're going to go through here. So we could just go through the setup. So we've got Fedimint 1 over here, which Alice is a member of, and she's paying Bobby BTC Pay over here for his Lightning node. Now this is just a standard Lightning node. There's no Fedimints involved in the creation of this transaction. And so what's going to happen here is that, so I can just see the chat, I'm going to ignore those for a sec, is that the BTC Pay server is going to create an invoice. And this invoice is effectively a contract. And this contract says, basically, I'm going to sell something. This is how I like to think of these contracts. I think it's going to help. So I'm going to say, here's a hash. And I will sell, if you can give me 10,000 cents, I'll sell you this pre-image of this hash. It's a bit like what a Lightning contract does. And he sends this contract over to Bob, over to Alice, and it's a QR code. And Alice can read this QR code, and it basically says, yeah, if you can get to this address and deliver 10,000 sats, I will give you this pre-image. It's available over here. And Alice says, all right, I want to pay that. I want to pay that invoice, but all I've got is Fedimint Bitcoin. So how am I going to do this? So what happens is Alice says, I'll write a similar contract. I'll add another hash time lock contract. And I'll say, I'll take the same hash, but I'll make it for 10,100 sats. And I'll pay it in Fedimint Bitcoin. And I'll have a contract that says, if you go and pay this invoice, I will pay you and 10,100 sats, and I'll know that you've paid because you'll have the pre-image for this hash, and this contract goes into the consensus engine over here where it sits. All right, and so now Dave, did I say Dave? Yeah, I think it was Dave. So Dave on Lightning Network the guy with the 2 bags, he looks at this and he says, oh, that's interesting. I can get 10,100 sats in this bag if I pay 10,000 sats out of this bag, which means I'm ahead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and have a look, and I'm going to plot a route through the Lightning Network and find how I'm going to pay this invoice. Fantastic. And then he says, right, I'll go and pay that invoice. And he goes, boo, 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 boo. And he sends the Lightning over to pay the invoice. And as we all know, the way those Lightning payments settle is that this pre-image effectively gets routed back towards Dave. Now Dave knows that pre-image also allows him to claim this contract over here inside the consensus network, which then gets him these sats. So what we can see quite nicely there in a visual context is that Dave is down Lightning sats, 10,000 sats, but he's up Fedimint Bitcoin sats, 10,100 sats. So that's how a payment is made out of the Fedimint and into Lightning. All right, now of course, if he gets too many of the Fedimint Bitcoin sats here, you can put those back and redeem the Bitcoin and then open new Lightning channels, which is how that balance would be retained. Now, when we talk about the payments into a Fedimint, effectively the same things happen. So you get the same setup over here for Alice doing the payment, but if we jump over here to Bob, what he's doing, he's setting up a similar contract, which again, but effectively this time what he's saying is, look, instead of sending money on my behalf, I want you to receive money on my behalf, and then I will pay you to receive the money. So this time the Lightning goes through the Lightning Network and ends up on Davina's balance sheet over here on Fedimint 2, and then she pays the Fedimint Bitcoin out to unlock the contract here. All right, and then that's how she gets this pre-image, which would then flow all the way back here and unlock the original contract as we had earlier. So that's the way the 2 payments work. All right, cool. So now this brings us into the trade-offs part of the document. So again, when we were going through the documentation, we wanted a kind of really honest view of what was really good about Fedimint, and we think there's a lot of really good stuff. And then can we have a really honest accounting of the trade-offs that you're going to get? So when I originally gave this talk in Yeppoon at the Bush Bash, I think I started off by saying, who likes holding their own keys and 21 million Bitcoin, and all the hands were up in the air, and I was like, we're going to play around with those norms a little bit today. We don't necessarily break them, but it's a different trade-off model once you bring custodianship into any of those systems. So what we've done, if I just flip back to the website in here, just to point out, what you've got is a view of the different risk aspects that affect the Fedimint, and then you can drill into each of these and you'll get a rundown of like what the risk is and the mitigation. Probably the more detailed one is around the debasement risk, because it's a very nuanced aspect to that. So it goes through the problem, it goes through the different ways of executing on it, what the impact of that is, and then the mitigations. And I'd encourage you to look through this stuff and just get used to the arguments. So the 4 that we'll just quickly cover off here, first one is custody, not your keys, not your coins. As is true for any custodial relationship, if you give up self-custody of your Bitcoin to another entity, be that a second-party trust relationship like a Fedimint or a third party like an exchange, it's not your keys anymore. I think the nuance that we like to talk about here is that Fedimint is a bit more like it's not our keys, not our coins, and that a lot of these custody relationships do happen quite naturally inside these second party relationships. So a good way to think about this is we go back to, be your mum's bank, be your mate's bank. There's an awful lot of Bitcoiners out there, and I know that I'm probably one, that do hold Bitcoin on behalf of other people, often in a family context. So, you might own your mum, dad's Bitcoin, your granddad's, your uncle's Bitcoin, and they don't really know what to do. This is just a different way that you could execute and do that inside a multi-sig context. So, yeah, that's one aspect of that. Now, the mitigation here is really about, you want to think about who you're trusting with your Bitcoin. So in the same way you just wouldn't send all of your Bitcoin into some dodgy exchange, don't send all your Bitcoin into some dodgy federation. Make sure that you actually do have that trusted second party federation there. Could be proof of, maybe it's the idea here is like proof of being able to walk up to somebody and punch them in the nose if they steal all your Bitcoin. That's a good, solid, trusted second party relationship. But if you can self-custody, and I think maybe a lot of us that are interested in Bitcoin probably already do, then it's, maybe it's more about you spending money or something else. So think about those trade-offs. The second one is around the inflation or the fractioning problem. So if we go into the Guardian view over here, this is a view of the assets and liabilities of a particular Fedimint. So what we'd say is on the asset side of the balance sheet, we know how much Bitcoin exists, and on the liability side of the balance sheet, we know how many times we've signed for a particular token. So if I'm an honest Guardian, what I know is I know whether my assets and liabilities match. I know that I've only signed for as many Bitcoin as I hold in that multisig, and I can test those as a Guardian. As a user, it's more opaque. You can't see that. Now, if I'm a corrupt Guardian, and particularly if I'm a corrupt quorum of Guardians, then the problem you've got is that they can actually sign extra notes to themselves without anybody else knowing. Now, the nuance that you've got to bear in mind there is that this would only happen where it's a corrupt quorum of the Guardians, and a corrupt quorum of the Guardians is already holding your Bitcoin anyway. So you're in a pretty bad situation if this is going on. Now, in terms of an inflation risk, what you then ask yourself is, well, they haven't inflated any Bitcoin because the amount of Bitcoin on the asset side of the balance sheet is still there. So what you've got is localized inflation inside a mint. And then the question becomes, right, well, what can I do with that? Because I can't just, go to anybody as though it's Bitcoin and give them one of these IOUs. It has to be executed within this Fedimint context. So I've probably got 3 different exit ramps. So one would be exit via redemption. So can I redeem this through, sorry, let's get back to where I was. Can I redeem this back from the multisig and the mint? Yes or no? Well, I could, but again, I'm already a corrupt Guardian. So maybe I'll just steal all the Bitcoin in the mint. Might be it's the better attack to do here, which is part of the custodial risk. The next one is, could I exit via merchants or other users? So this is a little bit more nuanced, but effectively, potentially you could have a situation where a corrupt set of Guardians are able to slowly issue themselves a little bit more eCash notes and then use those to kind of eat for free, as it were, inside the town. So they could pay for goods and services locally. People aren't regularly then using the Lightning Network or cashing these back out from the Bitcoin, and they kind of inflate the supply on a very local level. And then the third aspect of it is probably that you could exit via a Lightning Network gateway. Now, I think the problem with the exit via the Lightning Network gateway is if a lot of eCash goes out, it just forces the redemptions onto the asset side. So more of the Bitcoin then gets redeemed, and that gets turned back into channels. And so the Lightning Network's probably not getting defrauded, but what would happen is it accelerate a kind of mint collapse, and where none of the funds are available anymore. Now, the mitigations around that are going to be things like audits, automated bank runs, again, knowing your federation and who those Guardians are, like the concept of Guardians having this sort of standoff amongst themselves and being able to raise the alarm that somebody has, and raise the concept of cheating the users out of the money, and so on. And you can also have in-app monitoring there as well to say, like, if there's a high degree of redemptions, then something might be going on that we need to deal with inside the mint. So, all right. Regulatory pressure for guardians is another one of the trade-offs. So again, it's a very private system. Some people don't like privacy. Those people, I think, probably need to grow up a little bit. There's nothing wrong with shutting the door when you go to the toilet, but there can be problems around that for guardians that would want to hold one of these systems, depending on the regulatory environment. Now, again, it's been designed to, the whole design of Fedimint, it's got a lot of separation of duties. The idea is the guardians would not be commercial entities. The guardians would be entities that do this out of the love of the community. It's the Lightning Network is already an established role, so the Lightning Network person can be a commercial entity. So there's a different separation of roles inside there to try and ease the regulatory pressure for guardians. But that's probably one of the areas that you want to be clear on before you step into this. And the final bit we'll call out here is the Lightning Gateway reliance. So a lot of the power of the Fedimint comes when it's integrated into all of the different Fedimints and all of the different Lightning Network nodes and operators and merchants that exist in the greater Bitcoin ecosystem. To do that, you need a Lightning Network gateway. So the problem we have there is if this Lightning Network goes away, what do? Now you're back to just dealing with people that are in your local federation, and maybe it's much less useful. Now, again, what we said here is that Lightning Network gateway can be any user. So even in the absence of a Lightning Network going away, another user could spin up another gateway, and then they could provide the service to the network and get paid for it on their behalf. Again, this is a commercial service, so this is something you can do for a profit. So the expectation would be that there'd be one or two different Lightning providers for any particular federation, and if they go down, there's a good economic reason for somebody else to step into that breach and provide that service. So that's that trade-off. So, okay, it came through a lot quicker than we did back in your poon. But to learn more, there's several different places you can go and learn about Fedimint. So one is the Discord. So you can go to chat.fedimint.org. So that's how you find the Discord server. The Telegram room. So t.me/Fedimint. The website, obviously we looked at the docs earlier, fedimint.org. Or the Twitter handle @Fedimint. For myself, @Pete Winn on Twitter. If you want to say hi or ask any questions, I'm more than happy to get involved. Maybe one just cheeky call to action. We are looking to hyper-Bitcoinize vast quantities of the world as part of our plan for Fedi. There's a site, fedi.xyz/hyper, which is our community, our call to action for community hyper-Bitcoinization. So if you've got a community of people and you'd like to deploy a Fedimint in there and you want some help, that's the place to go. So fedi.xyz/hyper. So questions. I'm just going to pause for breath, maybe, and then
I got one. I wrote a couple notes. One on the topic of Guardian signing. Is that just like automated, meaning the keys likely need to be hot? Not exactly sure how that kind of works. Like, what if one of the Guardians is like offline or something, and then the user has to wait to get their Fedimint Bitcoin or redeem their Bitcoin? Like, just thinking it from like a UX point of view, if there's issues there. But how does the signing work on the Guardian side?
Effectively, yes. That would be hotkeys. I think there's probably some more nuance to this. So I did see Cody's in the room as well, who's one of the guys that helped a lot with the documentation. Now, the way it's designed is like, the keys might be hot to redeem the Bitcoin. It's a design choice about how it gets deployed. I think it's probably the great way to think about it. So you could potentially make it cold, or you could potentially separate them out in a similar manner to how you would do your validated Lightning sign thing. But at the point where you move the Bitcoin, you need the keys to be active. So depending on how you've deployed the Fedimint, they're probably more likely to be hot at that point. Or you would have some sort of process like BitMEX style for we only do one withdrawal a day at this time, and you can send through your redemptions for Bitcoin, but we'll just hold them until this point in time. But yeah, most likely hot. One thing that's probably pointed out is that you could separate out the keys for the transaction signing and the multi-sig signing as well for the redemptions. So you could have a situation where you keep the keys to redeem the multi-sig Bitcoin cold, and then that's something that you execute under a process, versus the transaction signing inside the Fedimint, which would be hot at all periods of time.
Yeah, Pete, you're definitely right about that. In terms of the like the consensus keys have to be hot because they're running epic rounds every like couple seconds or so. But for the multi-sig, that's just like, it's a giant deposit. It's just like a giant multi-sig wallet right now. Eventually it's going to be a Frost wallet or a Roast wallet with Taproot. But those keys, you only need to sign with those when somebody's trying to peg out. And so while currently those are hot, just because like you want to make it easy for people to leave the mint, technically those could be cold.
Okay, cool. Yeah, makes sense.
All right. So there's a whole host of questions that came through in the chat. It looks like Cody's done. Doom, nice. Cody, have you answered most of the questions in the chat, or is there anything that's worth picking out?
Yeah, I answered most of them. I mean, like there's some of them just kind of more technicalities. Like for why not maintain the list of unspent tokens? Is that so? When we're talking about tokens, like let's distinguish between the eCash and the Bitcoin, right? So it's like for the Fedimint Guardians, they're running Bitcoin nodes. Like they can be pruned Bitcoin nodes, but they have to come to consensus on what the current block height is for peg-ins and peg-outs, right? And so they're maintaining like the UTXO set, all the normal stuff that you would do with Bitcoin. But the thing they also have to maintain is the list of redeemed eCash nodes that they signed for, right? Because like Pete was saying, is that the only thing that the Federation knows is, yes, I signed this at some point, right? And so if they don't maintain a list of all of the ones that people have redeemed where they've showed back up and they said like, hey, this is an eCash node I'm redeeming, then they could show up later and just be like, hey, like here's the proof you signed for this, right? And so like, yes, that's a valid one. So that's why you have to maintain the list of spent ones. You can't maintain a list of the unspent eCash notes because that's the whole point of the blind signature, right? Like they don't know what it is until it gets redeemed, and once it gets redeemed, then they can do that. And so, like they're accounting for the amounts that they've issued. They're not accounting for the specific tokens that they've issued until they show back up. And once they show back up, then they can say like, yes, I'm redeeming this specific 100 sat eCash note or whatever that I wrote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I think I'll just pick out, there's a question from Sid, or maybe more of a comment. It says, so in a way, a Fedimint is like a side chain which is maintained by the Guardians. The data maintained in the chain is actually the unspent tokens. So a little bit. I think there's a really good talk at Honey Badger recently by Nifty from Blockstream, looking at different layer 2 solutions where she compared what was it, Lightning, Liquid, and then Fedimints, and she had a model, like a layer cake model, where she talked about there's always a multi-sig, there's always like an accounting system, and there's always an exit criteria for getting back out of the sidechain, and like a lot of the difference comes in the accounting model, whereas Lightning, it's like a 2 of 2 multi-sig, and the accounting is these unspent transactions. Liquid, it's a larger multi-sig, and the accounting is a full blockchain that tells you who owns what at any point in time. And then in the Fedimint, it's generally a slightly smaller multi-sig for the time, but then the accounting system is quite different because it's actually a set of these tokens. And so to account for the money that's held inside the multi-sig, you always issue a token, and then the user has to hold that token, and then that is a claim back on the stuff. So you have this almost like free banking style physical paper accounting model for claims on a multi-sig. So it's worth having a look at that talk. It should be on YouTube in the Baltic Honey Badger section, because that's a really nice way of thinking about it. It's the eCash tokens are really the accounting system for that, so you can do away with a blockchain, which then gives you different trade-offs.
And the Lightning Gateway, because that's presumably going to be part of the, like a member of the mint too, because it's going to be getting the tokens from the mint and it's going to maybe want to exchange them later for Bitcoin. I kind of see that like maybe having some like regulatory issues there, because like the Lightning Gateway is probably offering this service as a business and taking fees, and then part of that business model will be using the mint. So I could see like regulators, this is just me thinking out loud a little bit, but regulators thinking out loud and saying, oh, that mint's actually part of this LN Gateway's business, kind of falls under that. But I don't know, I just took a real rough note while you were talking about it, thinking out loud a bit. But
Yeah, I mean, with regulation, you always want to make sure that you understand the regulation inside the specific jurisdiction. I mean, the concept of a mint, when you view it as a set of trusted guardians in a community that are looking after Bitcoin for friends and family, that's generally not viewed as suspicious or, I guess, immoral or incorrect in any way from a regulatory point of view. It's generally allowed, and that's a space that you can operate in. We don't want to go around and break into every child's piggy bank just to make sure that the money you're holding for them is all there.
Yeah.
Or maybe we do. Who knows? You never know how these things go. So I think that's one.
Just a real fast.
Yep.
Sorry, real fast addition to that is that just there's a Chinese wall right between the Lightning Gateway and the mint. Right? Is that the mint is purely a threshold controlled asset structure. Of that, the only thing that they're doing is custodying. The mint is not making fees. The mint is not facilitating transactions. Every single transaction goes through the Lightning Gateway, and the Lightning Gateway is the one that makes it. Right, and so that's like that's a very specific design decision in terms of that the mint is not making money. The mint is not doing this for purposes of business. Like they're not this was something where it would actually be a lot easier to like do like transactions within the mint, just like hey, you get these tokens and then you just redeem them with the mint or whatever, and the mint facilitates that matchmaking between the two of you. But that's like a specific design decision of like the mint is not engaging in business with these people. It is purely a threshold controlled asset structure where like you're depositing Bitcoin and it's like being held in a threshold of these things, but they're not making money off of it or anything. The only people who make money are the Lightning Gateway. And the Lightning Gateway can be anybody, but this is just like the problem with any Lightning node is that it's making money, right? And so like whatever like the regulators they could like decide. Wasn't it like 2 days ago that the SEC decided that like all Ethereum transactions fall under their jurisdiction because like most of the nodes are in the US or whatever, right? So like they could say something stupid, but like in general, it's going to fall under the exact same structure for the Lightning Gateway of any other Lightning node, and for the mint as just any other multi-sig structure.
Yep. Cool. Sorry, just to lever it. I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes and just answer any remaining questions, but we did get to the top of the hour, so obviously if anybody has to go, feel free. So TJ is asking, does sending to Fedi offer an alternative to mix or breaking tracking? I guess you could say that. Maybe the way I'd think about that is in what's the point of breaking the link or tracking that you're after, because obviously going into any sort of multi-sig or sidechain and then coming out later, there's probably potential to do that. But if you're thinking more about, like transactional privacy, then yes, certainly. Like if you're looking to spend money and nobody knows who's spending it, then doing that from a Fedimint is a great way of achieving that. So if we go back to the example that we had of the Lightning Network invoice and then somebody in a federation paying that invoice, what's visible to the world there is that the Lightning node, the Lightning BTC Pay server knows that it was paid. As far as it could tell, the only thing that would be visible to the outside world is that was paid by a Lightning Network gateway who's presumably facilitating payments for, let's call it several hundred to 1,000 people inside this federation, and we don't know who in that federation has been paid. Now, the flip side of that, if you're the Lightning Network gateway, again, you don't know who inside that federation is paid, but you do know what you paid. So you know that you paid a BTC Pay server, and maybe you know it was $5, and so you can guess it's a particular hat or something like that, but you don't really know who bought it. So there's that aspect of privacy still to work out, but that's more of a Lightning Network problem. Now, I think some of the work that's just been done on LDK, I can't remember the name of the module, but to do the routing off on a light node is probably going to help that, because then you could have the application could create its own onion and then pay the payment on its behalf, which would then limit the amount of knowledge that the gateway has. Or an alternative way of solving that is you take the merchants and you put the merchants in a federation, and now all that's visible on to the outside world is really that some stuff moved from a place over here that has tons of people in it to a place over here that has tons of people in it, and we don't know anything more than that. We don't know who any of the people is. So if we go back to like the map analogy and all the different places where Bitcoin could be, it would be a bit like there's a bunch of people in Chicago and a bunch of people in New York, and a car leaves Chicago and drives to New York, and you say, well, who was in the car? And you go, I don't know. Somebody from Chicago has gone to New York. We just don't know who it is. So it's very good from like that level of privacy and obfuscation on the network. So I think there is good general privacy improvements as well by integrating this into Lightning.
Because when you talked about the execution kind of thing within the Mint too, you could obviously have other things that get executed in there. And I know you've mentioned in the past, Pete, about kind of being like black boxes, like stuff goes in, you can do stuff with it, stuff comes out.
Yeah, it's like Vegas, right? You can. Yeah. There's all sorts of stuff happens in Vegas. If you wanted to go to Vegas, and Vegas is allowed. It's perfectly regulatory fine. Vegas. Yeah.
Yeah, just as an example, Justin and I, when we were at BTC++, we did a Simpiment module, which was implementing Simplicity, which is Blockstream's markup language, like upgrade potential for Bitcoin as a module, right? So that's like not something that could come to Bitcoin in the foreseeable future until, like after like APO and like 4 other soft forks or whatever, right? But like that's something where on Fedimint, just because of the module system, because we've got a consensus engine side of it, that like you could do that, and so that's what we did. We called it a simp time lock contract. Was that you lock to a hash of a Simplicity contract, and then you execute the contract on the Fed side, and that would like peg in or peg out Bitcoin if you satisfy this.
Nice. This is another question, just picking off from the bottom of the chat. So Aggie says, I feel there's an above average amount of trust put on the Federation Guardians on part of the members. I'm not quite sure what the game theory is that would prevent an honest Guardian from turning rogue. I mean, that's somewhat true. I think the way I often think about this is that there's already a lot of a lot of custodians that exist, and many that aren't rogue, that have much higher degrees of Bitcoin than you might find in one of these community mints. So these are designed to be small communities, groups of people where there's already a trust relationship in there. Like, as I said, there's definitely a design space for huge anonymous online mints. You could almost think of BitMEX as being this huge anonymous kind of online no KYC gambling mint that existed back in the day, and people were more than happy to send Bitcoin to it, apparently by the hundreds of thousands, as far as the insurance fund looked at the end of it. So there's definitely a view that people do that, even with single custodians, and we see it all the time with exchanges and other systems. So I think what this is saying is that there's just more of a design space for, instead of the only options being you custody and then somebody you definitely shouldn't trust custody in it, maybe there's some people you already trust. Can we make it easier for those people to be custodied? And then can we effectively create a world where instead of a country having 4 banks and there's no competition and they just turn slightly evil over time, we've got a country that has 1 million banks inside it, and there's a lot of competition going on at a local and national level, and they're all keeping each other honest because they're all bank running each other and they're having a grand old time. Like, that's a better world to live in. So that's what we're after there.
I think it'd be a lot easier to take an individual to court as well, that if they screw you over, compared to like taking a big company or exchange that screwed you over.
Yeah, and sometimes we talk about it with some quite smaller communities where there is a lot of that trust element built into the running of the fabric of society. So You can talk about it almost like maybe the trust element is you walk over there to your uncle who's got the keys, and you kick him in the nuts because he's not giving you your keys or he's messing around, right? There's different ways of resolving this sort of stuff. One of the things that was theorized in the Bush Bash was talking about, like, would you start to see constitutions and various other like legal systems start to crop up around these mints to kind of formalize the system to make it easier to then take people to court if anything dodgy happened, and then layering legal controls. I mean, that's all out of the scope of the protocol. Like, the protocol's open, you can do all that stuff. That's really more of an implementation and community detail. But yeah, there could be lots of different ways you could layer on additional real world meat space trust into these things as well.
Just a couple of numbers that I think might help clarify some of this is like, for on-chain Bitcoin, there's been a total of 2.2 or so billion transactions ever. And so it's like, okay, so on-chain doesn't scale the whole world just because, there's 11 billion people, and just like in the entire history of Bitcoin, we've got 2.2 billion outputs. This isn't even just like unspent outputs. This is outputs total, right? And then, so it's like, oh, okay, well, Lightning is going to scale. Well, Lightning, just to open up a single channel, like, don't even talk about splicing, don't even talk about like sizing differences, don't even talk about like the price of that. Like, just for every single person in the world to have a Lightning channel would be 2 years of full blocks, right? Just to do the channel opens, right? Not even talking about the closes, not even talking about like the pinning attacks that would definitely still happen if you did that. So that's like, okay, so we need like some sort of layer on top of Lightning in order to, like, Fedimint is proposing to be that sort of scaling layer. And then in terms of the custody aspect of it, like when people are like, oh, hey, you're trusting the guardians or whatever, and like, why can't you just self custody? Like, the guy who replied to Hal Finney, like, hey, why would my currency be anything other than Bitcoin, when Hal Finney proposed microbank, right? And like the kind of answer to it is like, think about your self custody solution, and it's like any self custody solution that survives you getting hit by a bus involves threshold custody, which is that you have a backup system that people that you trust would be able to recover your funds if you died, right? And so, like, now the moment that you're talking about that, well, okay, so if they're able to recover it, how are they storing the keys? How are they doing? And it's like, well, now you start running into the Fedimint territory where it's like, if you're going to be trusting them to be your backup, then like, let's actually formalize that trust relationship and define it in such a way that, like, for example, for the threshold backup scheme for different Fedimint members, it's like, you have some backup so that you can take a majority of the guardians and recover if you lose your Fedi wallet or whatever. But without those extra shares that you have, they still have if all of them collude together, then they can recover your wallet, right? And so that's like a couple of different options for that one. But just like the things to kind of think about in terms of like the scaling beyond Lightning, because that's not going to fit 11 billion people on it. And then also just the threshold controlled asset structure of like, do you have a custody solution that's going to survive if you get hit by a bus?
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, I mean, we mentioned earlier that it's a modular system, and like the eCash is a module, the multi-sig aspect is a module. So you can just look at this as it's a standardized way from an open source protocol for managing multi-sigs in kind of clever ways. You could take the eCash out and just run this as a multi-sig arrangement with a backup module, and then all of a sudden what you've got is your multi-sig system encased in a tiny little Raspberry Pi that you can give one to your brother and one to your mom and one to your dad, and like they can then come together and get some Bitcoin when they need to. And there's other ways. So I did see some questions about the backups. So like, yes, there is a concept that because you're using this quorum of guardians to manage your Bitcoin anyway, and they can, if they're corrupt, they can effectively steal it. You may as well take advantage of that same trust relationship that's existing to work with your backups. So you can like do like a Schmier sharding of the backup data into the guardians and then use it to recover from them. So you can do almost like an offline recovery of like, okay, I'm going to go to the guardians and I'll reveal that I am actually Pete. And they'll say, yes, you're Pete. We know who you are. We can go through a checklist to say, you appear to be the right person, you're in the right time zone, you're talking right, you look like the guy in the pictures that we've got available here, and they can execute a process. If they're family members, maybe it doesn't even need to be a checklist. Maybe it's just like, yeah, of course you're Pete. And then when Ben turns up and he says, like, oh, I'm Pete, and he goes, oh, you're not Pete, you're Ben. We all know you're Ben. Or if anybody else turns up, or Cody turns up, say, oh, I'm Pete, and say, you're not Pete. You don't look the same. You look a bit different. We know Pete. He's my brother. You're not him. You've got that sort of relationship, but it's all now formalized in a software setup where all the keys are managed on your behalf, and you can do the recovery back into a simple application. So, like, there is this concept of that sort of social recovery. I mean, that's a lot of the details of like how that will actually work are getting worked out at the moment. But yep, that's an option, and you can start to get a little bit clever with that. Where we said if we go back to the spectrum of the different Fedimints that might exist. Maybe in the community one with thousands of people, you don't have such a good trust relationship with those people for backup, but you do with your family Fedimint. So there's nothing to stop you backing up the keys for your community Fedimint to your family Fedimint, because it's the same software system. You just say, oh, can you back up this system over here? And it's the key for this one. And I'll have my family Fedimint key in there. I could have my community Fedimint, my friends Fedimint, my non-Fedimint. I could do that. Or I could have two trusted Fedimints, A and B, and I could back up the keys from B into A and the keys from A into B. And then if the Guardians tried to recover them, they'd look at the keys and go, these don't make any sense. None of this is real. So like, there's different ways you can play around with that once you've got this concept of like, okay, well, here's a selection of different people that I can trust with those keys. All right.
I got one more question. Just more like, I guess, like a bit of an idea, but how could you see like the whole collaborative custody model that seems to be pretty popular at the moment, like with Block and Unchained Capital, Casa, potentially being a part of like federation setup? So say, for example, they have one of their multi-sig sign being like some third party, which could help with, preventing guardians who may know each other from colluding with each other, as well as having a third party who could potentially act as like an auditor, who's a trusted third party that says, but they can't sign, they don't have enough of the quorum of the keys to do that. But could you see like, collaborative custody being part of like Fedimint setup or something like that? Like, I'm sure people do heaps of stuff like this as it kind of gets rolled out, but just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is just collaborative custody by base design, really. Like I mean, there's nothing to say you couldn't have auditors in the mint. In a way, we kind of, like when we go back to the risk around dilution inside the mint. So like, can we create more of the notes than actually exist for the Bitcoin? Like, one of the guards against that is that you have the different guardians, and they have their view of the assets and the liabilities, and if they ever view that to be out of sync, then they would raise an alarm. The problem that it doesn't necessarily help with is that you've now got like the corrupt guardians can still just sign stuff off to the side over there and not tell you about it, and you don't know the difference because it's still a valid signature. And as far as I can tell, and again, this is probably a White Paper Wednesday question, but I don't believe that you can tell whether you were part of the signing round either. So all you know is that the threshold key was correct that signed that. So it's not like, say, I'm an honest guardian, and everybody else is a dishonest guardian, and I think, oh, it's weird that I only seem to be redeeming stuff that I've never signed, but yet I've been in most of the signing sessions because my uptime is this. So I can't necessarily track against that. I think, is that correct, Cody?
You know which ones you're part of.
Oh, do you?
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so you know which ones you're a part of. And then also, for like within the consensus, because we're using BLS. But so this, again, white paper, the threshold signature is BLS, the cryptography library that wrote with Tim Ruffing.
So and is it that I know that I'm part of the signing, or when it's redeemed and I check the signature, I know that I was part of that signature?
Yeah, for the epic round, you can see that you right. But for the on-chain wall, that's the thing that currently, well, with the multi-sig, like you can just see it just used for multi-sig, but the two options for going to Taproot, so that it's a single sig keypad spend, are frost or roast. If we do frost, then you can't find a point. You don't know which one.
Yeah.
Right? But if it's roast, so.
All right, cool. And then I think TJ says, you mentioned fedi.xyz/hyper. I did indeed. Go there if you want to get involved and you're looking to get some help setting up a community federation. So you'll see more details about what we're up to, and we'll be in touch if you sign up. All right. Maybe just pick up Simon here. What happens if a guardian loses a key? So again, you do have some built-in redundancy. So, some aspects of this it's gonna depend on like how you've deployed a particular Fedimint. So, is it people's laptops? Is it a bunch of Raspberry Pis that are just hidden all over the place? There's all sorts of different crazy stuff you can get into. The first thing to say is that if one guardian loses a key, then you can still carry on with the remaining guardians. But you would want to monitor that Fedimint, and you might say, okay, well, this key's gone offline and it's not coming back. Okay, well now we've only got this much space left before we can no longer sign, so we might want to take some actions against that. So some of the things that you could do is you could move the Bitcoin whilst you still have the remaining keys into a new multisig and then reissue certificates against that, for instance. Or you could set up a whole new federation and you could have all your users pay out via the Lightning Network into the other one. And so you bank run yourself into a new federation and then you just let the old one collapse, for instance. Or once we get, I guess with Frost and Roast more better integrated, I think this is the case, then you can start to more dynamically assess who the members of the multisig are. So we should be able to roll keys inside, although don't take my word for that. White paper
rolling keys. Yeah, rolling keys is just like it's like really complex geography, right? It's like very difficult to coordinate, and so kind of I think just repeat this. Just different multi.
Cool. All right. I think I've got most of the questions there. Is there any other questions anyone wants to bring up? Otherwise, we'll probably pull this one to an end.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. It was really good.
All right. Fantastic. I don't think we get any announcements on the recordings, so I'll say we are finished recording. There you go. Fantastic.
We've got a Fedimint developer.
Oh.
Half an hour. Right.
What was that, Cody?
There's a Fedimint developer meeting.
All right, so get on to chat.fedimint.org and look up the details of the Fedimint developer meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Recording was all good. It worked.